Okay, so in 1985, Carl Sagan testified to US Congress. He spoke about climate change and the problems that it's causing. And since then, we have, as I'm sure you all know, not done particularly well at reducing these emissions. And so given that our poor track record in this, there's an argument to be made that, well, can we do some sort of direct interventions that are short-term to mitigate the effects of climate change, acknowledging that the number one goal still needs to be bring down these emissions, but can we some of these short-term effects and maybe buy some time to get this under control? This is kind of the idea of things like resilience-based management, where we remove pest species or control overfishing or do some sort of small-scale restoration. All of these things are essentially designed to work with the natural recovery capability of a system, so to promote natural recovery. The problem with them is that they're difficult and expensive and really can't be done over large areas. And so on the Great Barrier Reef, if there's over 3,000 individual reefs that you could choose from of where you go and do this management stuff, you have to be highly selective if you actually want this stuff to make a real difference. One strategy of doing this is to target key source reefs, and essentially this is basically prioritizing these reefs that have a disproportionately large impact on the natural recovery of the system. And so just bear with me a little bit, but we can essentially run this algorithm every year where we can rank each reef on the Great Barrier Reef from 0 to 1, where 1 is it's really important for driving recovery of the system. And we say the top 5% of those are what we're calling key source reefs. And this is where you want management to go spend their resources. And so as a simple example, if you look at this diagram, this reef on the left with a very high coral cover. So this is a reef upstream with high coral cover, which means it's producing a lot of coral larvae, right? These little baby coral then drift on ocean currents downstream to these reefs that are in need of recovery, right? And so from a management perspective, if you are protecting this healthy reef upstream, you're sort of by proxy protecting the ones downstream as well. And so it's good bang for your buck in terms of management dollars. And just to show the counter example, if the upstream reef is very unhealthy, it's only producing a little bit of coral larvae, those baby coral, they drift on the ocean currents and then they arrive on reefs that are already healthy. That reef is not really contributing much to the sort of recovery of the whole system. So it's not great value for management to go protect that reef because it's not sort of outsourcing coral larvae to anywhere else that needs it. And so in our lab at UQ, this is sort of what we do every year. We run this algorithm and then we provide the results to groups like the Reef Authority's Crown of Thorns Starfish Control Program. And so it's one of the pieces of information that they use to then decide that year where's the most bang for your buck to go remove pest species. But in reality, 95% of reefs are not surveyed regularly. And so we don't actually know what the coral cover is at most places. We don't have up-to-date data. And so that was kind of the premise of this NESP project, is that, what do we have to fill in the gaps in this data? What do we have to fill this 95%? And, we have a whole bunch of cool technology that does new stuff that was previously unavailable. And we have a whole bunch of people who are already out on the water. These are, rangers. These are just keen divers. These are people out servicing mooring lines, wherever they are. There's a lot of people already out on the water who could be citizen scientists. So that was essentially the convergence that we formed the Great Reef Census. So the goal of the Great Reef Census was not to replace existing monitoring programs or even do the same thing. It's not getting really highly detailed information on each species or anything like that. It's getting sort of broad scale reconnaissance over large areas of just kind of seeing what's there. And so we focus on a couple of key coral morphologies that are important for various reasons, like branching coral, plating coral, and boulder coral, and really just trying to see where are the unhealthy sites and where are the really healthy reefs. Just kind of get that over large scale areas. The method itself is quite simple, a lot of trial and error through this project. This is essentially what we've settled on, is it a buddy pair of volunteers in the water, swim along. Every 5 fin kicks, they each take a photo of whatever's below them, take 40 photos each, and that is one survey site. And then we basically ask people to go do a survey around each side of the reef to capture the different conditions that that individual reef is experiencing, then upload these photos onto the platform with their GPS coordinates of where they took the survey. And that's essentially the end of the in-water component. The next bit is to get the information from these images. And so we worked with Dell to develop this semantic segmentation model, which is a sort of a type of artificial intelligence. And it basically goes and draws these polygon masks around each coral colony and tells you sort of what it is out of these basic coral categories. And so you get these masks, and you also get basically the percentage in this photo that is, for example, branching coral. And what we found is that this works really well for some categories, and it was kind of okay for other categories. So if you indulge me on a slight side tangent, going back to the early 20th century agricultural fair, this guy did a study where he was a statistician, and he brought an ox to an agricultural fair, and he asked a whole bunch of people to guess the weight of the ox, like guess how many jelly beans in the jar sort of thing. And what he found was that pretty much everyone was wrong, but a lot of people underestimated it, a lot of people overestimated it, and somewhat remarkably, if you took the average result of all these guesses, it was actually very close to the true weight of the ox. He then published it in Nature with this useless abstract, and basically called it the sort of wisdom of the crowd approach. And so this is essentially what we've done in another stage of this project. Is the images that are collected by the first group of volunteers can then be analysed by a second group of online sort of virtual volunteers from anywhere in the world. And so they get presented with the photo, the AI draws a polygon around what it thinks is a sort of coral colony, and they just click a button to categorize it as one of these sort of simple categories. And we get at least 5 people to do every single image, and so you get that sort of wisdom of the crowd approach to get some answers of what is in that photo. It's popular with a whole bunch of corporate partners, and a lot of schools do it, and high school kids are very good at this actually. So then this leads to sort of one of the big questions of we've built the system, but as with any citizen science thing, there's questions of, can you actually get something useful from this information, right? Is it helpful? So we published a paper last year, basically looking at the results of this. We had about 6,000 photos that we manually annotated what was in there, so we know exactly what was in there. And I'll just draw your attention to the branching column. This little blue bar is basically the AI results by itself. So you see the AI is producing sort of results that are on average maybe 1 or 2% off the true value, which we thought we were trying to get within plus or minus 5%. Somewhat arbitrary value, but sort of that's a nice range that we consider, okay, that's useful information. So the AI by itself was doing that quite well for branching coral. And then these little yellow bars is the wisdom of the crowd approach for plated and boulder. And again, you can see that it's doing quite the sort of wisdom of the crowd approach. If you get at least 5 people analysing each image, you can get quite accurate results as well. But that is with, say, 6,000 photos. And so there's a question that, well, if you need 1,000 photos from each site to get this level of accuracy, then there's not really, it's not going to scale, right? We're not going to be able to actually use this. So we also looked at, as you increase the number of images, right? So these green bars are basically the 95% confidence interval for the accuracy as you increase with X amount of images. And so once you get up to 80 images from a site, which is 2 people taking 40 images each, we're pretty confident that it's going to be within plus or minus 5% of the true value. And so that's encouraging. And in terms of how this kind of actually scales and how much of these gaps you can fill in, this is just to give you a sense of the number of reefs that are surveyed in any one year. And over the course of the whole project, over say 5 or 6 years, this is sort of the numbers we're talking about. And just to give you a sense of the order of magnitude and look at the spatial distribution, you can see that people are doing this in sort of all far corners of the Great Barrier Reef. And so I think there's quite an appetite. And the online engagement is sort of spread all over the world. And I guess the important bit is this is nearly 1,000 reefs, but they're specifically places that no one else is going, right? We're specifically, we just wouldn't have this information if it wasn't for this. We're not trying to overlap with other monitoring programs. We're specifically trying to fill in those gaps. And just to close the loop on the public facing stuff, we sort of put all these results on public maps. And so you can go onto the website and look at any reef and it'll sort of show you the percent cover of each group and total cover and when it was last surveyed and this kind of stuff. And you can go into any one individual site with a GPS coordinate and go look at the photos if you want a bit more of a sort of subjective feel about kind of what's there and what's going on. Okay. So we built up this whole big infrastructure. We think it works. We can get, there's quite a lot on the back end. So then the next question is, well, where should you survey, right? We can get accurate results, but should you just let people go randomly or can you be a bit more strategic? So again, there's thousands of options of places that people can go and survey, thousands of individual reefs. So where do we want people to go survey? One is scrap anything that has recently been surveyed, right? If it was surveyed by someone 6 months ago, we already know it's there. Don't worry about it. We don't need to go there. If it's regularly surveyed by others, like if it's the AIMS long-term monitoring program, right? They've got it covered. We don't need to go there and double dip. Cool. We can cross those ones off. This leads to ones that haven't been surveyed recently. Of these, there's some that we kind of still know approximately what will be there, right? If it's just a stable reef that hasn't had any disturbances, which is, not many these days, but if there's not much been going on there, we just kind of think, okay, this is what it was 5 years ago. We know roughly how fast coral grows. This is probably what it is today. We kind of have a rough idea. And in the same way, if there's been, catastrophic disturbances, like it was, catastrophic bleaching last year, followed by a direct hit from a Category 5 cyclone. Again, we don't know exactly what's there, but we kind of have a pretty good idea of what's going to be there. And so we can cross those ones off as well. They're sort of less priority. Then that leaves ones that haven't been surveyed for a while and they get these sort of intermediate disturbances. And so these are maybe a minor bleaching or sort of an indirect cyclone. And we know that these places, they can get really a lot of variation in how they respond to these disturbances. So some will go through unscathed and some will get completely annihilated. And so those are really good candidates to go survey. But if you kind of go one step further, the details don't really matter too much on this, but essentially we ran the key source reef algorithm thousands of times and looked at these ones that we don't know, basically what the coral cover is there. And we looked at, okay, will that actually affect a management decision if we go there? And so in some cases, we run this thousands of times, varying the coral cover, and we find that no matter what, this reef is never going to be a key source reef, right? We don't know what's there, but even if we did, we know it's not going to be important. And so in that instance, we don't need it. They're sort of uncertain, but they're not influential. So we can scrap them. We don't need to go survey them anyway, because it really doesn't matter what the result is. On the other hand, there's some reefs that we don't know what's there. And if we run this algorithm thousands of times, we realize that sometimes there's a possibility that this could be a really important reef. And so there's a chance that it's really unimportant, maybe, or there's a chance that it is a sort of a top 1% that we should really invest management resources in. And so those ones, you say, well, they are uncertain and the result is really influential, right? And so we don't know what's there. And if we find out, it's going to directly affect a management decision. So those are the ones that you really want to survey. That's a good candidate. Again, the details of this don't matter. We basically take this list of green circles, run it through some fancy maths called integer linear programming, and it basically spits out, say, 300 reefs that are sort of the optimal reefs to resolve the key source reef status of the whole system. And what we find is by surveying 300 reefs, we can basically find the 150 reefs that are most important to protect in terms of bang for your buck for management resources. And so, surveying 300 reefs is a lot, but it's still only, say, 10% of the Great Barrier Reef, which you think, okay, well, that's not that much. But it then basically tells you what 150 reefs are the most important to protect, and 150 reefs is within the capacity of the Crown of Thorns Starfish Control Program, right? They can go to 150 reefs every year. So then you actually get information that is useful to management. In terms of how this is operationalized, we basically put this into a public map, so any of the in-water participants can go out in their location, and we rank each reef sort of priority 1 to 5, whereas 1 is those ones I just spoke about. And so people can go and find the reefs closest to them that are really high priority. And we can add other things in there, like the COTS team want us to go survey some reefs every year that they can't get to. Some sort of research projects want us to add in to the priority list, things like that. And just quickly, a couple of other things that you can use this for. So the benefit of collecting all these photos is you can reanalyze them for different purposes. And so one of our partners is Mars, and they do rubble restoration, right? And so these rubble fields are these areas where coral can't grow until the rubble is stabilized. And so they go in and physically stabilize it. But again, it's quite expensive. It's sort of, they can only do it in very small areas. And so they need to be very selective. And so they basically wanted to narrow it down from these thousands of reefs to where's a good candidate site for their restoration work. And so we built an AI to identify rubble. It tells you sort of a percentage chance of rubble occurring in this area. Mars can then go onto the map, click an individual site, look at the photos and say, yeah, that's a good sort of rubble candidate, or no, the rubble bed's too shallow, or there's no healthy coral nearby, or it's too far offshore, or whatever. And it can narrow that list a lot further as well. And the last thing is, I guess a big part of this, the outcome of this project is that we're sort of exporting this overseas as well. And so we've got data coming in from the Red Sea, Hawaii, and Coral Triangle now. Hawaii in particular, we sort of have a full pilot year's worth of data. And so I'm working at Princeton Uni at the moment to look at the results from that. I haven't displayed them here, but initially it looks about similar to the Great Barrier Reef in terms of potential accuracy and the number of images needed to get that accuracy. And interestingly, the Hawaiian Department of Aquatic Resources, they want to use it in a sort of different way to what we do in Australia. They're more interested in a sort of rapid response survey protocol. And so they want to be able to mobilize communities sort of on any Hawaiian island to sort of quickly go out and do a survey in response to a sort of short-term acute localized stress. So I thought that was interesting. And I'll hand it over to Katie now to finish up with just another case study.
Thanks, Chris.
So I will stop sharing.
There we go. You should be able to see this. Hey everyone. So my role, or one of the roles I have in Great Reef Census, has been really to support traditional owner engagement with Great Reef Census. And I've had the privilege to work with a particular group with not only the citizens team and UQ team, but also with Sky McKenna here in Chopwater, working with Gunganji Mindingalpai Yidinji Rangers, which are based just southeast of Cairns and the Yarrabah community. They had their own goal of really looking how they can better understand their sea country reefs and support a healthy sea country through partnerships with others working in the research space and an applied space to have better connections and build capacity to get out and make decisions about those sea country reefs. So the project really was founded with them and to apply Great Reef Census from genuine partnership and relationships. And I think that's really been important for us to look at how we could pilot census to support traditional owner groups that as another end user want to make those decisions and make decisions about conservation or intervention actions in the future as well. Through the sort of reconnaissance style reef condition information that we're getting, it's not only feeding into programs with the Reef Authority and COTS control, but also can support their own decisions. So over a number of years of working together, we looked at what the fundamental things they needed to be able to get out and participate. And the first thing was really building confidence. So before we talk about scuba diving or other things you might use as a tool to be able to monitor reefs, we did some free diving exercises with a world champion freediver who happens to be based in Cairns. And again, building that relationship and confidence around breath hold in the pool systems, and then taking that out to the reef with a live aboard expedition. And this has been 3 years going, getting out to GMY Sea Country, and in doing so, you know, again, building those freediving skills and confidence amongst the ranger teams that we're out with, and getting in the water and capturing a snapshot of their reefs, going back to the same GPS locations each year. So it's been a bit of a test in terms of how we might shift the role of census and how it might be able to look at that sort of reconnaissance monitoring program for their needs, which is a little bit different to some of the things Chris spoke about earlier. So just to give you this is a really quick run through, we've been able to cover 7 reefs over 3 years, going to 45 coral sites in this last surveys in 2025, which we've been able to expand into the Sudbury Reef area. So getting some really detailed information in which we can go back year on year. And I just want to point out in their sea country, there's sort of only 2 reefs that kind of come up in the AIMS dashboard systems of the long-term monitoring program. One is at Scott Reef, which was last surveyed by Mantotow in 2025, pointing out they actually just the footprint of where they do those Mantotows is slightly different to sort of the areas that we're able to get to as well. And the only other site is Flora Reef, which is last surveyed in 2016. So the other 5 reefs aren't part of a survey program, and also some of that data is quite old. So they had, again, the drive to really get out and create their own ability to kind of monitor their sea country. And this is just looking at a snapshot from the first 2 years of data. So going back to, we didn't have exact overlap between year 1 and year 2 as we were piloting this, but ongoing now we're going back to those same locations. And this is just showing total coral cover based on what Chris was talking about at those sites. So the orange is that first year and blue the second year. And of course we had a mass bleaching event as well as Tropical Cyclone Jasper in the region. So we were looking at the potential that we saw impacts between those years. And we did see, if you look particularly at sort of Coates Reef, which I'm zooming in here on now, this is showing the actual difference in cover between years on these plots. So same information, just slightly different a view of that. And you can see there was, going back a bit of loss, especially in those plating communities that are Coates Reef sites, where other sites were able to look at somewhat mixed bag around Flora Reef, relatively stable overall, some sites going up, some sites going down. So this is just a bit of a snapshot of the kind of information that we can start collecting information at reefs that otherwise they didn't really have anything to go on to make decisions. And excitingly, this is now part of their Sea Country work plan. It's looking like together with citizens that we'll have funding to run this for another year this year, with plans that they're applying for their next 4 years of their Land and Sea Ranger program funding, and hopefully rolling this out and scaling this with other traditional owner Land and Sea Ranger teams that are ready. So we think there's other end users here, and looking at it and sort of that regional scale, of course, looking to the NRMs and other regional report card opportunities. So there's just other, I think, opportunities here with Great Reef Census and sort of that end user value of reconnaissance condition monitoring in the program. I think that's it. Oh, I did want to highlight that it was exciting to see 2 of the rangers are actually going to the International Coral Reef Symposium this year to present this work. So they'll be there in a couple of months' time to talk about Great Reef Census on that sort of international stage. So that's it from me. I know we were kind of running out of time, but I'm the next speaker. So I think that fair enough, we can run over a little, but I'll wrap there.